So we're back from Reform UK Party Conference in Birmingham over the weekend. So now is a good time, I think, for the four of us to reflect on what we saw, what we made of the party, its policy platform, the conversations we had, and I think most importantly, what it means for business thinking to engage with the party. One of the things that you noticed over the weekend, I think, was Reform saying that unlike the way that government traditionally works and the traditional parties have worked, that they're not going to be developing lots of policy and then putting it out for consultation, but actually they want business to come to them almost with a wish list of what they need and what they want. So that kind of relationship feels a little bit different than we've seen before.
Yeah, I think this is a very much an input stage. There are different sort of views in terms of economic policy outside of things like immigration and net zero, where I think there are different views across the spectrum of sort of ideological reform, and they want business to come to them with their wish list, and then they will sort of refine it accordingly. They talked about it, want it to be known as the party of business. Now, I do think that if there are any sort of businesses that are potentially looking at kind of what does this mean for the sort of net zero agenda, it will be an interesting ride to see. I think Reform was very clear about they don't want business to be asking them for anything that depends on subsidy. I think that's going to be a sort of key sort of differentiation. But it was interesting to hear sort of members of the Reform Board in the panel that I was on talk about that their pitch was that they know, business can know that if Reform says they're going to do something, they're going to deliver it. So that was the sort of pitch that Reform are making about business certainty.
And Phil, in terms of being in a position to actually make decisions, local level is clearly the most important area where Reform do have control. What was your takeaway talking to local councillors, thinking particularly about investment in infrastructure?
Firstly, it's important to remember that Reform now have almost 900 councillors and they have majority control in 10 local authorities around the country. And I think the question many companies and organisations would ask is, who are the Reform councillors? Well, it's important not to confuse them. They're not Conservative light councillors. It's also important not to confuse a populist party with independents. They're very much free-thinking, common sense focused local councillors who are focused on finding solutions to traditional problems, whether that's around services for the local residents or tackling some of the ballooning debt issues in local government. Whether they're YIMBY or NIMBY, I would describe them more as make my backyard great again. That's very much the context. They're hopeful, they're optimistic, they think they can do things differently at a local level. And I think it's important for organisations and businesses to understand that with a bumper round of local elections in 2026, that 900 councillors will probably be 2,000, maybe 2,500 councillors. After May next year, they will control many more councillors in that time.
And Ian, there was a lot of talk in the build-up to Reform UK conference about how this was going to be on a much bigger scale than they've run in previous years, and questions around what corporate attitudes to attending and engaging a conference was going to be. What was your takeaway?
My main takeaway from the corporate affairs perspective is that there's still work to be done. I think it's mission complete in the sense of having a conference of that scale. For that party, it's the first time that they've done that, so they've achieved that. However, I think we all recognise as a team that there seemingly was a lack of business presence. There were a few major businesses there, I think Heathrow being a principal sponsor and others. I was very interested from a financial services perspective and crypto perspective that there was some presence there. However, I expect compared to Labour and Conservatives, next time it's going to be a bigger presence from business. And I think the other element is, as Ali mentioned earlier, Zia, as the new head of policy, really wants to be engaging with business. And I think one of the things that came out of conference from that is the policy roundtables, of which I know we're talking to some of our clients about at the moment. And the other aspect is that they're very open to new ideas, which is fantastic to hear from business. But I think from the next step, and I think what Reform would like to achieve, is have a clearer policy agenda going into the next conference. And I think we're going to expect that on the back of the mayor elections.
So I think as a whole, we can see that there is now another party conference that's firmly on the agenda as part of autumn party conference season. It's a party that has to be taken seriously, potentially has to be taken literally, and was very keen to say that it means what it says, as was said earlier. And that means that business has to think about how it engages with Reform, as well as with all the other parties that are vying for attention. So plenty for us to think about. We will be at the other party conferences across the UK over the next few weeks. So lots to think about for business and for us.